and welcome to a relatively quick, hopefully, video just to go over the Nigeria case study. Now, this will come up on section B, the changing economic world, and offers us an example of rapid development in an LIC or NEE. Now, Nigeria is an NEE, but when you see that term on section B, that's when to apply this case study. So as we go through, I'm going to go through all the kind of key aspects of the case study, and you can kind of do this video in two ways, I suppose, this week. You can more than welcome to kind of quiz yourself and then pause the video and wait for answers. Or if you are making flashcards or making notes, feel free to go through the video. But I would recommend that you re-watch it again and you do test yourself. So before the boxes are revealed, the information is revealed before I speak, maybe do pause that video and give yourself a chance to kind of test what you already know and what you maybe don't know as well. Find any gaps in that knowledge. So without further ado then, let's start off with Nigeria. So Nigeria is an important place. It has got a huge range of ethnicity, and it borders 4 different countries in West Africa, just north of the equator. Nigeria is an interesting place because after the independence from the British Empire, it actually, the country was created to have 3 main tribal groups. The biggest of these tribes being the Yoruba tribe, and this leads to a big cultural difference across the country. We've also got a big divide between Christian and Muslim, and all of this kind of sets the context for the cultural background of Nigeria, and it's also led to the rise of extremist groups in the north of the country, in particular Boko Haram, which we'll come back to a bit later on in the video. So first things first then, it'll be 1 or 2 marks probably. We need to know why Nigeria is important on a regional level, that's kind of within Africa, or on a global scale, so why someone in the UK should give a monkeys at all about it as well. So I recommend you pause the video, try and get some answers for both of them, and then unpause when you're ready for me to go through. All right, so on a regional scale then, in Nigeria, it's one of the fastest growing economies in Africa. It's one of the most populous countries, 202 million, with one of the largest youth populations in the world, has a really diverse economy with financial services and media, etc. And it also has the highest farm output in Africa, so a huge output of food and resources across the continent. On a global scale, its GDP is massive. The one to perhaps remember is the fact that it's one of the world's biggest oil exporters, 2 billion or 2 million barrels a day rather. It's a huge contributor to the United Nations peacekeeping force, and forget Hollywood, Nollywood is actually the second largest film industry in the world now, that is watched all over Africa, but also all around the world in terms of global viewership as well. So well done if you got those. Moving on, this case study then looks at this idea that Nigeria's economy has changed. And pre-1950s, so pre-1950, the majority of industry in Nigeria was in the primary sector. That's agriculture, subsistence agriculture. Since the 1950s and the discovery of oil, that has started to change dramatically. And we now have a really, really, really big focus on manufacturing in the area. The growth of manufacturing, mainly related to oil, in particular petroleum refinery, or the creation of raw materials into manufactured goods, has led to economic development. And we should already kind of be onto this bit a little bit, but anytime there is anything in geography that is beneficial or creates more money, because manufacturing is more valuable than agriculture, it's going to do the following. It's going to provide a secure income, increase employment, increase tax revenue, increase foreign investment, and all lead to a multiplier effect. And the kind of way that the exam looks at this then is it goes a step further and says, well, if we're looking at manufacturing, another method of economic growth in Nigeria is all to do with TNCs, transnational corporations. I'd like to pause the video, please. Can you think of any positives to TNCs? Can you think of any negatives? And finally, in that evaluation column, overall, would you say TNCs are a good thing or a bad thing for a host country? All right, so positives then of TNCs in general. TNCs bring in huge numbers of jobs, which we know creates multiplier effects. They also bring in technology and knowledge that the host country does not possess. So the technology that Shell have, for example, in oil extraction, might be far, far greater than another TNC. Tesla opening a huge factory, a gigawatt factory in Germany. The Germans might do that themselves, but they might not have the technology and knowledge of how to do it. And they often also help to improve transport links in an area. However, unfortunately, a lot of the best jobs go to foreign workers and HICs in a lot of cases. Most of the profits do return to the HIC, and TNCs have a pretty dicey environmental record, in particular in the oil industry as well. So overall, I would say that TNCs do try and kickstart an economy. I think they are really important in doing so, but they probably could be seen as an example of what's called neo-colonialism, where the rich HICs still maintain the majority of profits. It's still keeping that development gap wide, where the rich stay rich and the poor stay poor. And in the case of Nigeria, we looked at one TNC in particular, that TNC being Shell. So again, if you pause the video, try and look now for some specific facts about the positives of Shell and the negatives of Shell. All right, so positives then. 91% of their contracts are given to Nigerian companies. They make huge contributions to taxes and export revenue, $20 billion, £20 billion, 2013. Direct employment for 65,000 people, but a further 250,000 jobs in related industries. All of these things create multiplier effects. We've got to be honest here, even though that figure of over 300,000 in jobs really in total is massive, the population of Nigeria is well into the 200 millions. So it's only a small scratch in the ocean. One TNC alone can't solve this problem. But not only do Shell's profits go back to the UK, not only do they give a lot of the highest paid jobs to foreign workers, the environmental consequences of them, from the frequent oil flares, two massive oil spills in 2008 and in 2009, destroying the town of Bodo on the Niger Delta, all mean that realistically, from an environmental standpoint, they probably are really negative. From an economic standpoint, they are good. But we've got to be careful that Shell aren't there to kind of solve Nigeria's problems. Shell are a small scratch on a wider issue. The multiplier effects that the taxes create, the Nigerian government should use to reinvest in their own industry, which would in turn support with health, wealth, education. But unfortunately, perhaps, maybe there's too much corruption for that to be able to actually happen. Okay. Now, the other little tricky topic that can get mentioned is all about Nigeria's changing political and trading relationships, which again we'll talk about in LIC or any EU study that won't reference Nigeria. And the first one we're going to do, and the second thing I'll go through, is the question I would have, and I'd like to pause the video and have a go at it, is how has Nigeria's political and trading relationships changed? What did it used to be like? Who are they trading with most now? Pause, answer, unpause. So predominantly, Nigeria was part of the British Empire, and development was held back until the 1960s when Nigeria gained independence. There is a small typo on here where it's repeated, but nowadays, Nigeria is cozying up with China. China and their TNC investment into new bullet trains in the country, into new housing development, into new infrastructure, means Nigeria was a former colony with the British Empire. It's now shifting further east to a closer relationship with China. On a social level, the biggest change in recent history has been the rise of this Islamic fundamentalist group Boko Haram, which has caused significant conflict in the north of Nigeria and hindered economic development. This is the group who do not believe in Western education, who have kidnapped schoolgirls, who the government has been fighting to some success for some time, all of which can cause negative cycles of decline in the north of Nigeria, because TNCs don't want to invest in those areas. Tourism is going to go down. All of those things will reduce money, reduce employment, and lead to the opposite of a multiplier effect. Culturally, well, Nollywood comes in here, second largest film industry in the world, but also the Nigerian football team, the Super Eagles, have won the African Cup of Nations on several occasions. And from an environmental standpoint, we can actually link in here deforestation and desertification, because on an environmental standpoint, Nigeria suffers from both. Okay, now the final two parts then, something that hasn't been asked about for a little while, is all about the impact of international aid in an LIC NEE you have studied. And although you could talk about goat aid here with Tanzania, which is what we did for our food case study, and you could also talk about the aid that Nepal or Hainan receive as well. But ideally, I'd like to go with the ideas of Nigeria. So, again, pause the video, please. Can you give me any examples of aid in Nigeria and how they help? And what some of the limitations of this aid is? Why does aid not always work as a method to reduce the development gap? Pause, answer, unpause. Okay, so the two that I've gone for are, number one is the Nets for Life organisation, which are anti-mosquito nets. Both of those things, well, that's going to improve health. Less kids are going to get malaria, so more kids are going to go to schools, and literacy rate's going to go up. They're going to have more chance of getting jobs in tertiary and quaternary employment, more tax to the government, etc. But also as well, aid from the United States of America has aimed to educate and protect people against HIV and AIDS, both of which are going to improve health. If health improves, more kids go to school and more adults can go to work. However, aid in Nigeria is a little bit of a touchy topic because, unfortunately, corruption, which is an economic factor, by the way, an economic cause of uneven development, corruption is still very, very, very high in Nigeria. And unfortunately, that aid money has not been getting to the people who need it most on lots of occasions. And then finally, we've got kind of two questions that could be an easy 9 marker. The first one is economic development bad for the environment? Now, the short answer is, yeah, it probably is, yeah. Look at mining and oil extraction here, you know, huge amounts of oil spills. I mean, look at that, 1,010 oil leaks since 2011 in Nigeria. We'll re-reference that Bodo oil spill as well. Or massively environmentally unfriendly. But we can also make links here with paper 1. I mean, you know, we've had this huge rise in traffic congestion. We've had lack of sanitation. We've had squatter settlements and slums being formed because of overcultivation, deforestation, changing land use. We have desertification in northern Nigeria. All these things are causing massive environmental problems. And for this exam, you're going to want to have a couple of bullet points to bring in for your main arguments here. And then finally, and perhaps the biggest question we can ask about this case study is, looking at all the information on that video, the question we would have is, has quality of life actually improved in Nigeria overall? Well, on one hand, I think it definitely has. I mean, you can read through some of these statistics at your own leisure. I advise you learn a couple of them. Let's take a few examples. You know, HDI gone from 0.47 to 0.53. The fact that life expectancy has gone up by, well, nearly 10 years in a 40-year period. 38% now have internet access. 70% have a mobile phone. Healthcare is getting better. Education is getting better. Overall, Nigeria is healthier, wealthier, better education, than it was in the 80s and 90s. However, let's be honest here, government corruption is still a massive problem. The environment is being destroyed, and that can have significant health issues on people. And the fact of the matter is that even today, 60% of Nigerians still live in poverty of less than $1 a day. If 60% of the country are still in extreme poverty, we can't accurately say that quality of life has improved in Nigeria overall. In particular, Boko Haram, limited female education, the 6% in poverty, and the corruption mean that my conclusion would be that quality of life has improved for some, but not all. And that's a really great way of giving a conclusion at the start of an answer. The environmental impacts of TNCs will impact some, but not all. And in Nigeria, it's the case where, yes, overall, the country has certainly developed. It's healthier, wealthier, better educated. But to say that everybody in the country has benefited is completely wrong. Because if you are living in those areas with Boko Haram, if you are one of those 60% in extreme poverty, you are not going to be telling a similar story. Thank you for watching this short video. If you go back through the slides on your video or replay the video, I would recommend testing yourself on some of these boxes just to make sure you know exactly what it is you are talking about. Again, the Shell case study, good to have some facts about. Making sure you know what these 4 things mean and what they are. Making sure that you have specific examples of aid and being able to explain how that would benefit the country, but also why aid is somehow limited. And there's our information on here. Thank you for watching, and please watch the other case study videos on the channel.